Hello there, Homeschool Nolan here to help you navigate learning in the digital age. It's back to school time, but if you're a homeschooler, the learning never stops. And one of our most important goals as homeschooling parents and teachers is to prepare our kids for the future. But how do you do that when the world seems to be changing faster than ever? I recently came across an interesting book called The End of the World is the Beginning, Mapping the Collapse of Globalization by Peter Zeihan. In this book, Zeihan basically argues that the world we knew in 2019, right before the COVID-19 pandemic, is never coming back. Our children will now grow up in a world and become young adults in a world very different from the one we grew up in. And if you follow the news, you may have seen headlines about COVID-19, war in Ukraine, supply chain problems, inflations, and tensions in the Taiwan Straits all seem to confirm that we are indeed living in a very different world from the one from just a few years ago. But the question then is, what does this mean for our kids? And how do we help prepare them for this new world? Before answering this question, let's first look back and review the globalized world economy many of us knew and loved before the year 2020. The globalized world, which Peter Zeihan talked about in his book, was a time when nations of the world all peacefully manufactured, consumed, and traded goods across oceans and continents. Just about everything we consume, from automobiles to smartphones to the foods we ate, were made possible by products shipped between countries. Having products and commodities manufactured in countries with the cheapest skilled labor kept prices low. Some of us probably now all longingly look back on the days when we bought stuff online or at the store, which were cheaper than they are now. This was all made possible, according to Zeihan, because the United States, as the world's dominant superpower, was able to guarantee the safety and shipping across the seas through the mighty U.S. Navy. But the wonderful world of globalization now seems to be coming to an end, or at least unraveling. The lockdowns due to the COVID-19 pandemic seemed to be the start of it, as factories around the world had to shut down. But as the world emerges from the pandemic, it doesn't seem like globalization as we knew it is coming back anytime soon. Tensions with China and war in Ukraine have continued to put a strain on trade relations and global supply chains for everything from automobiles to fertilizer and food and natural gas. We see the effects of this every day through higher prices. Some people call it inflation. But what is really happening is not just an inflation of the money supply, but instead real goods and services that rely on manufacturing and critical supply chains from overseas are actually indeed becoming shorter in supply and thus more expensive. So besides higher prices, what does this mean for us and our kids? And how can we prepare them for this new, uncertain future? I've been giving a lot of thought lately to how this new world has already impacted my kids. And here are 3 trends that I believe are here with us to stay. First, there will now be more barriers to international travel. Looking back now, I really appreciate that I grew up in a time and in the world where, as a child, teenager, and then as a young adult, I had the good fortune to travel and visit many countries across Europe and Asia. Every young person, in my opinion, should travel to as many countries as they can to give them a broader perspective and help them appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of their own country. Now, kids can and still will be able to travel in a deglobalized world, but rising fuel costs will make it more expensive from now on. And depending on where you go, we now must be much more mindful about local COVID restrictions in different countries. We also must be mindful about our safety when traveling to certain geopolitical hotspots around the world. Eastern Europe, Russia, and Ukraine come to mind. Now, on a personal note, my family had been visiting both China and Taiwan almost every year up until 2019. And over the course of many trips, we never once had to worry about our safety traveling there. But given the military tensions going on in the Taiwan Straits and political conditions in China, it doesn't look like anyone from my family will be traveling there anytime soon in the near future. But a more important and significant trend I see in this new world is that manufacturing is cool again. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, back in the old days, before 2020, many companies had moved their factories to countries like China and other places where the cost of skilled labor was much cheaper. Not only did this result in the loss of manufacturing jobs in more developed countries like the United States, but it forced many young people to forget about pursuing jobs in manufacturing and instead try to pursue an expensive college education, which would hopefully lead them to a good paying white-collar job. But today, companies are now rethinking where they want to locate their factories as the advantages of globalization begin to unravel. A good example of this is that major computer chip companies like Taiwan Semiconductor, Intel, and Micron have already announced plans to build new chip factories in Arizona and Texas. So what does this mean for our kids? It means that in their adult life, they can now expect to find many more good job opportunities working in factories. But these aren't the factory jobs of 100 years ago where workers would mindlessly do one specific task on an assembly line. Instead, robots can now do those jobs better than humans can. But highly skilled humans are now needed to operate these robots and other complex machinery in these factories. I really believe that as the traditional four-year college becomes increasingly more expensive and out of reach for more families, opportunities for getting a good paying job in an advanced factory with sophisticated machinery will become increasingly more available and attractive for more and more young people. But if you do go to college, one field of study that I believe will become increasingly relevant and important is agriculture or agricultural studies. All my life, I'd always taken for granted that every time I visited a grocery store, there would be an abundance of different foods at affordable prices. But if you're like me, you may have noticed lately that prices at the grocery store have risen, and sometimes the food items we're looking for is out of stock and not available. I had no idea just how dependent the modern grocery store is on globalization. For example, I had no idea that much of the world's fertilizer and wheat comes from Ukraine. And because of the war in Ukraine, there's already a shortage of these critical commodities, and this is already driving up food prices and causing scarcity. There's a reason that super rich billionaires like Bill Gates have been buying up lots of farmland lately. In a deglobalized world, with wars and stretched supply chains, we can no longer take all the wonderful foods we eat for granted. The world will place increasing value on people who can understand and work in farming, food, and agricultural science. So again, preparing our kids for the future is one of the most important things we do as parents and teachers. And while nobody can predict the future with certainty, the trend towards deglobalization does seem to be indeed happening at the moment. And I hope this video has helped you rethink how you want to prepare your kids for a new and uncertain future. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.